Welcome to the story of how the Miata almost never happened. Today, the MX5 Miata is a global icon. It's the best-selling two-seat roadster of all time, loved by everyone, from weekend cruisers to hardcore racers, and even hairdressers. But here's the twist, the Miata almost didn't happen at all. In the late 1970s and early 80s, the roadster was practically extinct. The British cars that once ruled, the MGs, Triumphs, and Austin Healys were fading fast. Safety laws, emission regulations, and corporate belt tightening were killing the fun car. If you're a young driver looking for an affordable, lightweight convertible in 1980, you're basically out of luck. And yet, out of that drought, Mazda brought the Roadster roaring back to life. But the story of how it happened? That's almost as surprising as the car itself. Let's rewind. The Miata concept doesn't begin in Japan, but actually in America. Yep, amongst those giant V8s, the little Miata was born. A journalist named Bob Hall, based in California, came up with the initial idea. In 1979, Hall was working at Motor Trend. During an interview with Mazda, they asked him, "If you could design any car, what would it be?" Without hesitation, he answered, "A small, lightweight, rear-wheel drive roadster, like the old British sport cars, but reliable." At the time it sounded crazy. The market for small convertibles was gone. The MGB was limping towards retirement, the Triumph Spitfire was out of breath, and even the Fiat Spider was fading. British roadster sales in the UK had fallen off a cliff by the late 70s, with MG's Abington plant eventually closing in 1980. The era of the cheap open-top sports car seemed finished. But Bob Hall wouldn't let the idea go. In the early 80s, he joined Mazda as a product planner in California, and from inside the company he kept pushing. Mazda should be the brand to bring back the Roadster. It was a gamble. Mazda was a small player at the time compared to Toyota and Nissan. Their hits were cars like the 323 hatchback and the rotary-powered RX-7. But maybe, just maybe, they could make something no one else was brave enough to try. Mazda decided to take Hall's idea seriously. But they weren't just going to sketch one car. In Tokyo, one team developed a front-engine, front-wheel drive roadster based on existing platforms, practical, cheap from an R&D perspective, but not very romantic. In California, a team at Mazda's new R&D office in Irvine created a front-engine, rear-wheel drive roadster. Light, playful, and true to that British formula Hall was after. And in Hiroshima, engineers proposed a mid-engine concept, sporty, but complex and expensive. For years, these three directions battled it out. Mazda built full prototypes of each, known internally as Project 729. Test drivers compared them back to back, and in the end, the California team's layout won. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was about balance. Rear-wheel drive gave the best handling feel. It was cheaper to build, and it aligned with the Japanese design philosophy, Jinba Ite, or horse rider as one. Mazda sweated the details. The target weight was under 950 kilograms, about 2,100 pounds. A double wishbone suspension front and rear, engineering usually reserved for expensive cars. The styling crew drew inspiration from the Lotus Elan, but with smoother, modernized proportions, and those iconic pop-up headlights. They weren't just a fashion choice, they were a clever solution to US headlight regulations at the time, which would have made fixed lights ruin the slick shape. By the late 80s, the prototypes were ready. The only question was, would anyone actually buy one? The 1989 Chicago Auto Show. Mazda pulled off the cover of its new car, the MX5 Miata. Mazda's gamble had worked. Under the hood sat a 1.6-litre inline-4, making 115 horsepower. Not much on paper, but with the featherweight body and slick-shifting 5-speed manual, it felt alive. Early owners fell in love. Mazda offered a simple package: manual roof, no-frills interior, pure driving joy. And enthusiasts noticed how well it responded to modifications. Suspension tweaks, turbo kits, and track builds quickly appeared. But of course, it wasn't perfect. The early 90 and 91 cars suffered from the infamous short-nosed crankshaft issue, causing timing disasters. Rust also became a nemesis. The rockers and rear fenders were prime targets. Still, these quirks were minor compared to the disasters that killed the British roasters. The Miata was charming, affordable, and dependable, a recipe people didn't know they'd been missing until it was back. As the NA Miata matured, Mazda kept refining it. In 1994, the engine grew to 1.8 litres, 128 horsepower, and was paired with a stiffer chassis, additional bracing, bigger brakes, and an optional limited slip diff. The special editions flourished: British Racing Green with tan interior, the lightweight R package for track enthusiasts, and shiny M editions for collectors. Mazda milked the formula while keeping the spirit intact. Meanwhile, rivals tried to respond. Toyota, they offered the MR2, but its mid-engine layout was pricier and more demanding to drive the limit. Honda wouldn't release the S2000 until a decade later, by which point the Miata already owned the affordable roadster market. Even Europe took notice. BMW launched the Z3 in 1995, but it was heavier and more expensive. Between 1989 and 1997, Mazda sold over 400,000 NA Miatas worldwide. By the late 90s, the Miata wasn't just a success, it was the benchmark. The Miata's real legacy, though, isn't just numbers. It resurrected a dead genre. It proved that joy and simplicity could win in a world obsessed with power and gadgets, and it inspired a whole culture. Miata clubs, grassroots racing series like Spec Miata, and a new generation of drivers who realize you don't need 400 horsepower to have fun. When the Guinness World Records named it the best-selling two-speed sports car in history, it wasn't because Mazda aimed for glory. It's because they listened to one stubborn journalist's idea and bet on fun. And that's why the Miata almost never happened. But when it finally did, it became a legend. I hope you enjoyed.